My son's French fiancée mocked me right there at my own dinner table, thinking I couldn't understand her language, but she was mistaken. My name is Judith. I'm a 72-year-old widow living in Charleston, South Carolina, and my younger years in Paris gave me more than just fond memories. That arrogant whisper wasn't just an insult. It was the thread that unraveled a sophisticated criminal plot hidden behind a perfect mask. This is the story of how this old relic exposed the wolf in sheep's clothing to protect her family. So pull up a chair and let me tell you just how it all went down. It all started on a sweltering April afternoon, the kind of thick southern humidity that makes the magnolia blossoms in the garden seem to wilt. Daniel, my 40-year-old son, stopped by. He was wearing an expensive suit, looking every bit the successful architect, but I could see the weariness deep in his eyes, a shadow from his bitter divorce 2 years ago that hadn't quite faded. He'd always been a sensitive boy, and the split with Linda had cost him not just a wife, but a piece of his own self-confidence. He sat down on the wrought iron garden swing his father used to love, staring off into the distance without a word. I brought him a glass of sweet tea, laid a hand on his shoulder, and asked about his work, his new projects. He answered with a forced enthusiasm, as if he were trying to convince himself that everything was fine. Then, after a long silence, he turned to me, and I saw a spark in his eyes I hadn't seen in a very long time. "Mom," he said, his voice a little hesitant, "I've met someone." My heart did a little flip-flop. Half of me was overjoyed, the other half tightened with that instinctual mother scare. "Her name is Sophie Gerard. I think she's the one." "Is that so, son?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "Tell me about her." And Daniel told me. He spoke of an elegant, intelligent Frenchwoman who worked in the art world, someone he'd met by chance in a coffee shop. He spoke with an infatuated tone, a kind of worship that I recognized immediately. It was the voice of a man who wasn't just in love, but who was desperate to be saved. He wanted to introduce her to me over the weekend at a small family dinner. Of course I agreed, because in the end, all a mother ever wants is to see her child happy, isn't it? But as Daniel left me alone with my blooming camellias, I found myself hoping this time my boy would find his happiness. That weekend dinner took place in our elegant dining room, under the glow of candlelight and the scent of the herb-roasted chicken that was Daniel's favorite. And then Sophie Gerard walked in. I have to admit, she was flawless. A petite frame, brown hair swept up in a seemingly effortless but chic bun, and a navy blue silk dress that set off her porcelain skin. She had a subtle, understated beauty, but her eyes, intelligent hazel eyes, seemed to be constantly observing. When Daniel introduced us, she shook my hand. Her hand was soft, but her grip was firm. "I am so honored to meet you, Mrs. Thompson. Daniel has told me so much about you." Her English had a charming little lilt, just enough to be different, but not enough to make conversation difficult. Throughout the meal, Sophie was the perfect guest. She not only praised my cooking, but also intelligently discussed the architecture of the house, correctly citing the architects Daniel admired. My Daniel was walking on air. He was beaming with pride, constantly looking at me as if to say, "See? Do you see, Mom? She's perfect." He talked about Sophie's family of artists in Lyon, her work as a gallery manager, their dreams. I listened, nodded, and smiled. I noticed the way Sophie's eyes swept over the landscape painting on the wall, a valuable, if not famous piece, and how she assessed the wood of the antique sideboard. It wasn't the gaze of an art lover, it was the gaze of an appraiser. And then it happened, the moment that changed everything. As we were having dessert, I poured Sophie some more of my homemade chamomile tea. With all the goodwill of a mother hoping to welcome a future daughter-in-law, I said gently, "You must miss home, Sophie. Life in a new country can't be easy." Sophie looked at me, smiled that perfect smile, her eyes twinkling in the candlelight. But then she turned to Daniel, who was sitting right beside her, and in a whispered French, a tone she thought only my lovesick son could hear, she said, Elle est charmante, un peu simple, comme une relique d'une autre époque. Il faut être patiente avec les personnes âgées, n'est-ce pas, mon amour? Daniel, with his broken French, probably only caught the word charmante, charming. He nodded and smiled, a happy, innocent smile. But I, who had spent my youth wandering the streets of Saint-Germain-des-Prés in Paris, heard and understood every single word, every condescending nuance. A relic. A chill shot down my spine. Time seemed to stop. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner suddenly felt deafening. The warmth of the evening vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp insult. She had sized me up, dismissed me, and mocked me right in front of my son at my own table. I didn't let my expression change. I didn't scream or make a scene. I just slowly set the teapot down, looked directly into Sophie's eyes, and gave her a polite smile. But it was no longer the smile of a hospitable hostess. It was the smile of an old soldier who just heard the call to battle. A cold fury was coiling in the pit of my stomach, but on the surface, I was still Judith Thompson, a genteel Southern widow. The war had begun, and she didn't even know it. After dinner, Daniel happily helped me clear the dishes in the kitchen, chattering on about how well Sophie and I had gotten along. My heart ached at his innocence. I just smiled and said Sophie was a lovely girl. Meanwhile, Sophie said she needed to step out onto the porch to make an important work call. The old oak kitchen door was left slightly ajar, enough to create a separation, but not enough to block the sound. As Daniel put the porcelain plates away, I stood silently by the sink, pretending to wipe up a spill, but my ears were straining to listen. Sophie's voice was no longer melodic. It was brisk, businesslike, the voice of someone reporting in. She was still speaking French. No, he doesn't suspect a thing. It was easy, she said, a hint of impatience in her voice. Then I heard the words that made my blood run cold. Le colis est prêt pour lavage. The package is ready to be washed. I froze. Washed? That wasn't the language of a gallery manager. It was a term Walter used to use when talking about clients he suspected of being involved in illegal activities. Then she continued, her voice even lower. Oui, le canal de Charleston est propre. La transaction sera bientôt finalisée. Yes, the Charleston Channel is clean. The transaction will be finalized soon. The Charleston Channel? My son, Daniel, he was the Charleston Channel, and he was being used to wash something. All the disconnected pieces suddenly snapped together into a terrifying picture. The calculated perfection, the appraiser's gaze, the arrogant insult, and now the jargon of the criminal underworld. This wasn't just a common gold digger. This was a professional, part of a much larger scheme, and my son was just a pawn in her game. When Daniel turned back to me, smiling, and said he was going to take Sophie home, I just nodded. Drive safe, son. I didn't sleep that night. I sat alone in Walter's office, surrounded by his old law books and case files. I stared out at the garden, shrouded in darkness. The peace was gone, replaced by a suffocating sense of urgency. I was no longer fighting to protect my son's heart from a little pain. I was fighting to save his entire life. And I knew, in this fight, I was on my own. This relic, as she'd called me, was about to prove that sometimes the oldest things are the sharpest. The dawn in Charleston always has a gentle beauty, with the first rays of sun cutting through the mist hanging in the old oak trees. But on the morning after that fateful dinner, I had no mind for beauty. I woke with an iron resolve. I had to talk to Daniel, to warn him, even though I knew it would be like trying to stop a rushing river with my bare hands. He arrived around 10, carrying a warm basket of croissants from his favorite bakery. "Figured you'd like these," he said, the happiness from the night before still clinging to his smile.
My heart felt like it was in a vice. How was I supposed to burst this bubble of his? We sat in the sun-drenched living room. I decided not to attack head-on. I know my son. When cornered, he only gets more defensive. I started carefully, choosing my words like a tightrope walker. "Son, I'm so happy to see you this happy," I began. "I truly am. But I get the feeling that Sophie is a little too perfect. Every one of her answers was just a little too right." Instantly, I saw the shift in Daniel's eyes. The warmth vanished, replaced by a cool guardedness. His shields were up. "What do you mean, too perfect?" he asked, his tone already sharp. "Isn't that a good thing? Would you rather I date someone full of flaws?" "That's not it, Daniel." I tried to keep my voice calm. "It's just, my life experience tells me that no one is perfect. She knew all of your interests, all of your passions. It's like she'd studied you." Daniel set his coffee cup down hard on the table, the clatter of porcelain on wood sounding sharp and final. "Studied me? What are you talking about? It's called being interested, having a connection, something I never had with Linda. Why can't you just be happy for me?" Desperation started to creep in. "I am happy, but I'm also worried. Son, you've just been through a hard time. Your heart is vulnerable. I'm just afraid." "You're afraid I'll make another mistake? Is that it?" He cut me off, his voice laced with bitterness. "You've always thought I was a child who couldn't make his own decisions. You don't trust me." That was a knife to my heart. It's not about trust. It's about love.
"No, it's about control." Daniel shot to his feet, pacing the room. "I know you're worried, Mom, but you don't understand. Sophie is the best thing that's happened to me in years. I am not going to let you ruin it because of some ridiculous gut feeling." The conversation had turned into an argument. His voice got louder, filled with years of pent-up hurt and frustration. He wasn't just defending Sophie. He was defending his right to choose, his right to fail, his right to live his own life. Before I could say another word, he turned for the door. "I won't let you do this," he called back, not even looking at me. "Not this time." The door slammed shut behind him, leaving me alone in the sunlit room that suddenly felt cold and empty. My warning had failed. Worse, it had created the first real crack in our relationship. I realized I couldn't fight this battle on my own. I needed an ally, someone who could see what I saw, but with an expert's eye. I sat in Walter's office, looking at his old, worn address book. There was a name I hadn't thought of in years: Sam Jones. Sam was Walter's old colleague from his days in Washington, a retired FBI agent now living the easy life, fishing down in Florida. He was a brutally practical man who didn't believe in gut feelings, only in facts and evidence. He was exactly who I needed. I took a deep breath and dialed the number. Sam's voice on the other end was as boisterous and teasing as ever. "Judith Thompson! Well, I'll be. I thought you'd forgotten all about this old coot." "Hello, Sam. I won't waste your time," I said, getting straight to the point. I told him everything, from the dinner and the French insult to the phone call with its strange terminology. At first, Sam chuckled. "Judith, you know how these European girls are, always romanticizing things. Washing something could just be a metaphor for starting a new life." "It wasn't, Sam," I insisted. Her tone wasn't that of a woman in love. It was the tone of someone executing a transaction. And then there was the phrase, "The Charleston Channel is clean." When I said that, I heard silence on the other end of the line. Sam's laughter was gone. "Say that again?" he asked, his voice suddenly serious. I repeated it, word for word. Silence. Then I heard the faint sound of Sam typing on a keyboard. "All right, Judith," he said after a long moment. "Listen, it's probably nothing. You're probably just being an overprotective mother. But I'll make a few calls. Don't do anything until you hear from me. Got it?" "Got it," I replied, feeling the first flicker of relief in 24 hours. I wasn't alone in this anymore.
While I held my breath waiting for news from Sam, Sophie made her next move. She wasn't just a con artist, she was a brilliant strategist. She knew that to fully control Daniel, she had to capture not just his heart, but his ambition. A few days later, Daniel called me. The tension in his voice was gone, replaced by a barely contained excitement. He wanted me to come to his architectural firm to see something special. Daniel's office was a modern space, filled with light and architectural drawings. Sophie was already there, looking professional in a white pantsuit. She greeted me with a friendly smile, as if the argument between Daniel and me had never happened. Spread across the large conference table were the preliminary designs for a boutique resort in Portugal. It was truly impressive. "Look at this, Mom," Daniel said, his eyes shining. "This isn't just a normal investment opportunity." Sophie stepped forward, her voice no longer that of a muse, but of a sharp business partner. "Daniel, I told my partners in Portugal about you. They saw your portfolio and they are completely convinced," she said, placing a possessive hand on his shoulder. "They don't just need your money, Daniel. They need your vision. They want you to be the lead architect. This isn't an investment. It's a legacy. This is the project that will put your name on the architectural map." I looked at my son. I saw him drink in her every word, his eyes wide with admiration and hope. It was a devastatingly effective blow. After his divorce had left him feeling like a failure, after years of doing safe but boring commercial projects, this was exactly what he craved. Recognition, a masterpiece, a chance to prove he wasn't just Walter Thompson's lawyer son, but Daniel Thompson, the architect. Sophie wasn't just offering love, she was offering salvation for his career and his self-esteem. "The project requires a rather large initial investment," Sophie continued, her tone casual. "But with its potential, it's just a drop in the bucket." Daniel nodded eagerly. "I've looked at the numbers. I can manage it. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Mom." I stood there, surrounded by blueprints for a fake, glorious future, and felt more helpless than ever. My son was flying into a trap like a moth to a flame, and he believed he was flying towards the light. I went home with a growing sense of dread. That very evening, Sam called back. There was no trace of humor left in his voice.
"Judith, I'm sorry. You were right. It's much worse than I thought," he said. "The name Sophie Gerard doesn't exist in any database, but the terms you heard, they match the MO of an international money laundering ring we've been tracking for years. They specialize in using reputable people with clean finances, people like Daniel, to legitimize dirty money. That resort in Portugal is a shell company. Judith, your son is in real danger. You need to pull him out now." My heart stopped. I had no more time to hesitate. Risking the complete destruction of my relationship with my son, I had to act. I drove straight to his office, despite the late hour. I saw the light was still on. Daniel was working, lost in his drawings. I burst in without knocking. "Daniel, stop," I said, my voice trembling. "It's all a trap. That resort isn't real. Sophie is lying to you. You're about to lose everything." Daniel looked up, his eyes red from lack of sleep, but filled with rage. For him, this was the last straw. My warning, in his eyes, was the final dismissal of his abilities and his dreams. "Stop it, Mom," he yelled, jumping to his feet. "You've never believed I could do anything great on my own, have you? You just want to control my life. This is my project. It's my future with Sophie. You have no right to ruin it. I'm just trying to protect you." I was almost in tears. "I don't need your protection," he roared. "I'm 40 years old. Go home, and don't you ever speak ill of Sophie in front of me again." He turned his back on me, a final cruel gesture. I stood there in my own son's office, feeling like a stranger. I had lost. I drove home in a daze. As I turned onto my familiar street, my headlights swept across a black sedan parked on the opposite side, under the shadow of an old oak. I'd never seen that car before. A feeling of unease washed over me. I went inside, but didn't turn on the lights, just peeked through the curtain. The car was still there, silent as a predator in waiting. My phone buzzed. It was Sam.
Judith, they know you're involved. His voice was urgent. I just got word. You're being watched. Lock your doors. Don't go anywhere alone. You're dealing with very dangerous people. I put the phone down, my hand shaking. This was no longer about money or a broken heart. It had become a fight for safety, maybe even for our lives. And I, a 72-year-old woman, was standing right on the front line, trying to protect the one person who had completely turned his back on me.
After that fiery confrontation at the office, Daniel didn't contact me for 3 days. 3 days of a silence so heavy, it felt like 3 centuries. The strange black sedan was a regular feature every night, a quiet reminder of the danger that was lurking. I was living on a knife's edge. Every little sound outside made me jump. Sam called me daily, his voice filled with concern. "They're waiting, Judith. They're waiting for Daniel to make the transfer. That's when we have to move." On the afternoon of the 3rd day, my phone rang. It was Daniel. My heart seized, a mix of relief and terror. "Mom?" His voice on the other end was flat, emotionless. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold resolve. "I'm calling to let you know. Tomorrow morning, Sophie and I are going to the bank to make the wire transfer. I know you don't approve, but I have to do this." "Daniel, don't," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "Please, just listen to me this one time. It's a trap." "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, and I could hear the finality in his voice, a finality born from hurt and wounded pride. "But I have to prove you wrong. I have to prove that I can build something on my own. Goodbye." He hung up before I could say another word. Silence enveloped me. He had made his final decision. He had chosen her, chosen that fake dream over my warning. Tears started to roll down my cheeks, but they weren't tears of helplessness. They were the tears of a mother who was about to do something incredibly painful to save her child, even if it meant destroying his world to do it. I wiped my eyes, picked up the phone, and called Sam. My voice was frighteningly calm. "Sam, it's me," I said. "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock at the downtown bank branch. We're out of time. It's a go." That morning, a somber beauty hung over Charleston. The sky was gray, the air damp. I didn't go to the bank. Sam had insisted I stay home. "This is our job now, Judith. You've done more than enough." But I couldn't sit still. I drove to a little cafe across the street from the bank, found a hidden corner, and watched. The bank was a historic building with grand columns, exuding an air of dignity and security, of false security. At precisely 9 o'clock, Daniel's car pulled up to the curb. He got out and opened the door for Sophie. He was wearing a well-tailored suit. He looked so confident, so determined. Sophie, in an elegant cream-colored dress, took his arm. They looked like a power couple, on their way to conquer the world. They had no idea their world was about to come crashing down. I spotted Sam, disguised as a tourist in a loud Hawaiian shirt, reading a newspaper on a nearby bench. I also recognized 2 others, a young man and woman who looked like a couple out for a stroll. They were Sam's people. Daniel and Sophie walked into the bank. My heart hammered against my ribs. All I could do was pray. Inside the luxurious private transaction room, as Sam later told me, the atmosphere was completely professional. Daniel and Sophie sat across from a senior bank officer. The project portfolio was laid out impressively on the table. For Daniel, this was the moment of a lifetime. He was signing his name to his future, his legacy. The officer handed him a set of documents. "Mr. Thompson, this is the irrevocable international wire transfer authorization. Please review it carefully and sign here." Daniel picked up the fountain pen his father had given him, a pen he only used for the most important occasions. He looked at Sophie with a gaze full of love and trust. She smiled back, an encouraging smile. He looked at the project portfolio, his eyes shining with pride. This signature would set it all in motion.
This signature would prove to his mother that he was right. He was just about to sign. At that exact moment, the door swung open. The branch manager, an older gentleman whom I knew had been briefed by the FBI, walked in with a grave expression. "Pardon the interruption," he said. "Mr. Thompson, as this is a transaction of a very significant value, our security department requires we re-verify both parties' identification one more time, just to be safe. Miss Gerard, may I please see your passport?" The tension in the room snapped taut. I saw Sophie's composure flicker just for a second, but she quickly recovered. She smiled and said, "Of course," and opened her handbag to retrieve a French passport. But before she could hand it to the manager, the door opened again. Sam walked in, his Hawaiian shirt looking completely out of place in the formal setting. The two agents I'd seen outside followed close behind him. "Hello," Sam said, his voice quiet but clear, echoing in the silent room. "Christina, the trip is over." Daniel shot to his feet, his chair tipping over behind him. His face went from confident to completely bewildered. "Christina, what are you talking about?" he stammered, looking from Sam to Sophie. "This is Sophie Gerard." Sam didn't answer him. He just stared at the woman who was now sitting perfectly still. "Christina Marsh, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and use of forged documents." One of the agents stepped forward and cuffed her. The click of the handcuffs sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Daniel stared at the cuffed hands of the woman he loved. He shook his head, unable to process what was happening. No, this is a mistake. Sophie, say something. Tell them this is a mistake." And then Christina Marsh, also known as Sophie Gerard, spoke. As the cuffs closed around her wrists, the panic I expected to see never came. Instead, the perfect mask she had worn for so long slowly dissolved. The charming smile vanished, the warm eyes turned cold and contemptuous. She looked directly at Daniel, my poor son, who was still hoping for an explanation. And then she laughed, a dry, cold, chilling laugh. The charming, lilting French accent was gone too, replaced by fluent, cruel, and precise American English. "Did you really think you were the lead architect?" she said, each word a twisting knife. "Oh, Daniel, your designs were never going to be built. They were just window dressing for the paperwork. Your name, your clean reputation, that's what we needed. You're not an artist, you're the washing machine." Daniel staggered, catching himself on the edge of the table to keep from falling. His face was as white as a sheet. Christina wasn't finished. She glanced toward the door as if she knew I was watching from afar. "And send my regards to the relic at home," she said, mimicking her own mocking words. "Tell her she won this round, but her son will never trust his own judgment again. He'll always wonder if he's just some pathetic fool. That's the real price." Then they led her away, leaving behind a dead silence and a completely broken man. I don't remember how I drove home. When I got there, Daniel was already there, sitting motionless on the garden swing where this whole story began. He'd been sitting there for hours, staring at nothing, his suit still perfectly pressed, but his spirit completely crushed. I didn't say a word. I just quietly went to the kitchen, brewed a hot cup of chamomile tea, the kind he'd loved since he was a boy, and set it on the small table beside him. A long time later, as the sun began to set, painting the garden in melancholy shades of purple, he finally looked up. He didn't look at me. "She was right, Mom." His voice was broken, barely a whisper. I wanted to believe it so badly, that I could build something myself." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "I didn't listen to you." I walked over, stood behind him, and placed my hands on his shoulders, which were trembling uncontrollably. "It's okay, son. I said softly. "Everyone makes mistakes. The important thing is, you're home now." He didn't answer. A single hot tear fell onto the back of my hand, then another. He buried his head in his hands and began to cry, not the loud sobs of a child, but the silent, agonizing weeping of a man who had lost everything: his love, his money, his dream, and his faith in himself. I stood there, holding my son, as the Charleston night fell around us both. The war was over. The criminal ring was stopped. But looking at my shattered son in my arms, I didn't feel like a victor. I only felt the endless ache of a mother's love. I had saved him from the wolf, but I couldn't save him from the wounds the wolf left behind. The journey to healing, I knew, would be much longer and harder than the battle we had just fought. And this time, I would be right by his side, not as a warning voice, but as someone to help him pick up the pieces.